healthy fast foods are not ultimately good for us is important for our cognitive health. It's important for our longevity because they affect us on a neuronal level. Our brain cells get affected over the long term, and people don't realize it because in the short term they think that 10 minutes that food makes them feel good. But unfortunately, there's a long term effect that we have to be very careful about.
A lot of people experience mood swings that are related to unstable blood sugar levels. If someone is experiencing mood swings and if they decrease the amount of simple refined carbs that they eat and include more colorful, fiber-rich foods, more veggies, more berries, more beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, lentils, lower glycemic whole grains, will this help to optimize the nutrients that keep blood sugar levels steady?
Those are the whole food nutrients and the nutrient dense foods which actually help to stabilize blood sugar and help to create that balance and not have people have that what they often call a crash where they've eaten something and they have a real change in their mood and how they're feeling emotionally because there's such an upswing and downswing after such food. So those foods really help to regulate our blood sugar, keep us on an even keel. I often will say to people, fiber is your friend when you have anxiety, and that's because fiber-rich veggies, fruit and beans and nuts and seeds, having those types of things as snacks, will keep you not only satiated for longer, but they break down at a very different rate in your body. They break down slowly, you remain calm, your blood sugar level is more even. And so these things have been shown in studies. And the only caveat I would add to that, John, is that that's to be carefully differentiated from mood swings, which are part of bipolar disorder, because certainly food can be affecting it, and I see it and have seen it all the time. The mood swings may need some sort of additional intervention from a psychiatrist, a prescriber to evaluate the mood swing in that condition. But foods definitely impact it as well.
I'm thinking about depression again and how many people are suffering from depression these days. And a very recent study published at the end of 2021 in the Journal of Affective Disorders. The study, they involved more than 25,000 participants, and it found a strong association between mushroom consumption and lower odds of depression. And they found that this association remained very strong even after accounting for sociodemographics, risk factors, self-reported diseases, medications, basically a host of other factors. While this study specifically focused on mushrooms, a number of other medical studies have examined the relationship between diet and depression and always seem to find a link. What's the take-home message for our listeners who may be dealing with depressive symptoms?
For one thing, John, look into what I describe as cleaning up the diet a little bit. If they're leaning on those fast foods and processed and packaged foods too much, starting to cut back on that and replacing it with simple things like you mentioned mushrooms, adding in those veggies to their diet, whether that's roasted, whether it's a snack, whether it's adding it to breakfast, whether it's a lunch. These are powerful foods which can, in fact, impact their mood. You know, mushrooms are rich in bioactives like beta glucans. These impact our immunity. They are great sources of prebiotics and great sources of dietary fiber. So just mushrooms right there is a good way to get you started. Some people have difficulty because they don't like a certain vegetable, but there's such a variety to pick from. So if someone doesn't like one vegetable, choose another. But leaning into these are really becoming, in my opinion, and in the way that I think about nutritional psychiatry, I think about it and I try to describe to my clients a nutritional psychiatry plate. And for the most part, that plate is largely filled with vegetables and my favorite fruit being berries. So what I'm glad about is the scientists catching up with this and reminding us of how important it is.
It really is, and I'm thinking about our kids. Among the many factors that shape the lives of children, nutrition plays a critical role. And when what children eat can exert a profound influence over the molecular environment and the neurochemical functioning of their brains. It can govern the way they process information. It can influence the way they think and learn and act and experience themselves in life. Now, we have many studies showing that children with higher intakes of B vitamins and other brain active micronutrients do better in school than those children whose diets are lower in those nutrients. And other studies have found that children who are exposed to heavy metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, those kinds of things, through their food or their air or their water, have reduced learning and reduced memory and impaired functioning of their central nervous systems. I once saw a child wearing a t-shirt that said, "If you love me, don't feed me junk food." And I felt like applauding when I saw that. What goes through your mind and heart when you reflect on all this?
When I reflect on that, I think that's a really empowering message. Not only is it humorous, but it's actually very real. I mentioned in cognitive aging, we really need to be starting now. In a similar way, how does a child learn to eat healthy or unhealthy? They learn usually from their parents. So I think that it's never too early to impress upon even children what healthy eating is, involving them in food shopping, taking them to a farmer's market, whether you grow some vegetables at home, having them help you prepare healthy foods so they understand what it feels like, what it tastes like, what the touch is like. That sensory experience is so important, and they really begin to absorb what healthy whole foods are. There's been a very important recent research about the level of obesity in this country, which was worsened during the pandemic. And one of the other concerns during the pandemic was a very high rate and rising rate of teen suicide. So I feel as though one of the very critical things in our youth and our children is teaching them from an early age how to eat healthy whole foods, how to stay away from those junk foods. They may come across junk food if they go to a birthday party, but it's not what they're eating the rest of the time. I think it becomes critical for their physical health, but also very importantly for their mental health as well. It's key that kids learn healthy eating too.
Uma, what gives you strength? What allows you to keep doing what you do in the face of a culture that's pretty blind to what you're wanting us to see?
I care deeply about the destigmatization of mental health, John, and for me, as a psychiatrist, seeing such suffering in individuals firsthand, food and the discussion around nutrition, the lens that food provides for me is a conversation starter with individuals who are suffering. And it really has become a mission to help to destigmatize mental health through this way. And even if it's small and steady steps, I think that it's important. I feel like, mental health is the parallel pandemic. It's really was uncovered by COVID to some extent. And I think that it's powerful. And I think people don't realize the power that they have at the end of their fork and the fact that it is their own decision, unlike a prescription pad. People have many feelings when the doctor prescribes a medication, but you can choose to eat what you'd like on your own and you can make healthier choices. So what ultimately keeps me moving forward is being grounded in that mission and feeling that that gives me purpose to bring this message forward in as humble and as eloquent a way as I can, always making sure that people know what the updated research is and that they feel slow and steady changes can help them. It's no longer, John, about that waistline and about losing 5 pounds before an award show or a friend's wedding. It really is, how can you sustain that? Weight loss can be a part of it, but how can you sustain those changes through eating healthy whole foods?
Well, that's the question, and you're helping people to do that, Uma, and I so appreciate your message, your work. I want to thank you for emphasizing the role that a healthful diet can play in mental as well as physical health. I think that's been a hugely overlooked reality, and I think it can help a lot of people to recognize the truth of this. It's been a real pleasure for me to talk with you today, and on behalf of myself and Ocean, and really everyone who eats and everyone who has a brain, I want to thank you for your wisdom, your thoughtful and scrupulous research, your deep compassion for helping people.
That is the sound of the instant pot release with steaming potatoes instead of baking. Steaming them in the instant, cooking them in the instant pot. 30-second break.
Clinical professor of medicine at UCSF and author of 7 best-selling books, including his latest, written with his partner Ann Ornish, Undo It: How Simple Lifestyle Changes Can Reverse Most Chronic Diseases. Dr. Ornish's 3 main stage TED Talks have been viewed by over 6 million people. His 43 years of research have proven that the lifestyle changes he recommends can improve heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and prostate cancer. The Ornish program was the first lifestyle-based program to be covered in the history of Medicare. And the Ornish diet has been rated the #1 diet for heart health by a panel of experts at US News and World Report for 11 years since 2011. Dr. Ornish has been recognized by Life magazine as one of the 50 most influential members of his generation, and by Forbes as one of the 7 most powerful teachers in the world. So now, Dean, we are so glad to have this time with you. And for the interview, I'm going to hand it over to my dad and colleague, John Robbins.
Well, thank you, Ocean, for that introduction, and thank you, Dean, for being with us once again. We so appreciate you as a friend and your work. And I'd like to begin this by asking something about what brought you to your work. How did you get here, Dean? What's been the journey?
Well, let's see, long ago in a galaxy far, far away, in Texas actually, where I grew up, I was at Rice University in Houston, and I had a full-blown case of what we probably call now the imposter syndrome, where I felt like I was stupid, that I'd somehow managed to fool the admissions committee, but now that I was with a bunch of really smart kids, it was just a matter of time before they figured out what a mistake they made in letting me in. And also I had what I can only describe as a spiritual vision, which was more than I could handle at the time, which is that nothing can bring lasting happiness. And so the combination of feeling like I was never going to amount to anything and the feeling like even if I did, it wouldn't matter anyway, it was like, well, why don't I just kill myself? Dead people look like they're peaceful, and I was so agitated I could hardly sleep or even sit still. So I made plans to do that, and probably would have, except for in one of those obvious examples of how sometimes bad can actually be life-saving. I got such a horrible case of infectious mononucleosis that I literally couldn't get out of bed, didn't have the energy to kill myself. My parents got wind that I was doing poorly, came down, saw what a wreck I was, and went home to Dallas with my plan to get recuperate enough to be able to have enough energy to kill myself, as insane as that sounds, which it was. And there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and my older sister had been helped. She was a child in the 60s and had been helped by an ecumenical teacher named Swami Satchidananda. And he was giving a lecture in Dallas that night that I was home. So my parents decided to have a cocktail party for the Swami. This was in Dallas in 1973, which today would be weird, but especially weird back then. And in walks this central casting's idea of what a Swami should look like, with long saffron robes and long white beard, and sat down in our living room and began to give a satsang, a lecture, and he started off by saying, nothing can bring you lasting happiness. And everyone else had told me, oh no, just, get rich and famous and, have kids and get married and all that stuff and you'll be happy. And I knew that would be nice, but it was not going to bring happiness. And so to actually have somebody saying the same thing, I felt validated, but then I was thinking, well, gosh, he looks really happy and I don't feel happy at all. What am I missing here? Anyway, so I thought, well, let me move killing myself down to plan B, and I changed my diet, which, having grown up in Texas, I was eating meat all the time and other unhealthy stuff, and tried to meditate and exercise and, love myself more, and so I could love other people more, and began getting glimpses of what that felt like, which felt really good. That's how I got interested in this whole field, because it taught me, John, that suffering can be a doorway for transformation, and that's really why I do this work. When people are hurting, change is hard, but if you're in enough pain, as I was when I was so depressed, or someone might be who's just found out they have a heart attack, or prostate cancer, or type 2 diabetes, or whatever, that when someone's hurting, there's a doorway for transformation that I wasn't trained as a doctor to take advantage of. It's a sacred opportunity is the only way I can put it. Just like it was for me when somebody reached me at that right time. I was so open and ready to change that it's like, okay, this is weird stuff, but what have I got to lose? I was going to kill myself otherwise. Let me get this weird stuff to try.
Early this year, once again, the U.S. News and World Report recognized the Ornish diet as the #1 diet for heart health, as Ocean mentioned when he introduced you. For those of our listeners who don't already know, Dean, what is the Ornish diet?
Well, I appreciate the question. I'm very grateful to U.S. News for rating it #1 for all these years. It's essentially the same diet for reversing heart disease as it is for reversing type 2 diabetes and early stage prostate cancer and perhaps early stage Alzheimer's disease. We're doing a study to look at that, which we can talk more about later. And it's essentially a whole foods plant-based diet like you've been writing about for so many years. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products, as close as possible to how they come in nature, minimally refined and, with a minimum of added stuff, salt and sugar and things like that. It includes also the exercise of, a half hour of aerobic exercise a day, whatever you like. If you like it, you'll do it, so do what you like. And a little bit of strength training and resistance training and stretching. It's an hour a day of meditation and other yoga type stretching, breathing, meditation exercises and breathing techniques. And the love more part, which people often have the hardest time with, is that, okay, eat well I get, stress less I get, move more, okay, sure, actually doing something, but love more, what's that about? In our studies and in our reversing heart disease program, we have support groups that are designed to not just help people stay on the diet, but to recreate that sense of community that's so primal to our survival. Study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed and isolated, like we talked about earlier, are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely when compared to those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And so that's really powerful and helps to really enable people to make change. I find that information alone isn't always enough to get people to change. If it were, nobody would smoke. And if we don't also address the sense of a meaning and purpose and joy in life, then it's like, well, who wants to live longer if you're not enjoying your life? And so the diet is important, but it's part of the overall package.
Dean, your research has shown that the Ornish program is incredibly effective at reversing heart disease, and you've also shown that it can reverse type 2 diabetes and reverse early stage prostate cancer. And now you're doing a study to determine if your program will also reverse early stage Alzheimer's disease. And of course, your program includes exercise and stress reduction and deepening human connections, as well as the Ornish diet, which is essentially a whole foods plant-based diet filled with lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes, seeds and nuts and soy products, all minimally refined with a minimum of added salt and sugar. What I want to ask you, Dean, is how did you come to think that so many different chronic diseases might actually respond so powerfully to the same program and to the same diet?
I was trained, like all doctors, to view all these conditions as being fundamentally different diseases, different diagnoses, and different treatments. And yet these same lifestyle changes affected all of them. I thought, well, maybe it's because they're not so different, that they're really the same disease. They have more in common than different, manifesting and masquerading in all these different forms, because they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms: chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome and immune function, and telomeres and gene expression, and angiogenesis, apoptosis, etc. And each one of these mechanisms, in turn, is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. And so then it radically simplifies what we advise people to do. The book begins with one of my favorite quotes, which is from Albert Einstein. It says, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." So Anna and I try to reduce it to its essence. Eat well, move more, stress less, love more. And that it's not like you have one diet for, as you well know, for heart disease, a different one for type 2 diabetes and so on. It's because it's the same condition, just manifesting in different forms. That's why you'll often find the same person has heart disease and type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure, high cholesterol, overweight, etc., because they're all just the same cause manifesting in all these different forms. So that radically simplifies it.
When you talked about the love more component of your protocols and how people who are feeling depressed and isolated and just down, they become susceptible to illness and all kinds of problems, and how important it is to forge those connections and create genuine connections between and among people. I want to ask you, What do you love about the work that you get to do?
Oh, no one's ever asked me that before. That's what gets me out of bed every day, that and my family and my close friends. It brings meaning to my life. And when I was so depressed, I could take all the meaning out of life. That's what being depressed really is. Later I learned that I could put all the meaning back in everything. And one of the ways of putting meaning back for me is to serve other people. And the most selfish thing I can do turns out to be the most unselfish thing I can do, because that's what helps free me from suffering and brings me meaning into my life. I also learned that another way I could bring meaning into my life was by choosing not to do certain things. I find it interesting that so many spiritual paths and religions have dietary guidelines of one sort or another. Some you can eat all the time, not enough time, some on holidays, certain times of day, times of the year, months of the year, whatever. And whatever the intrinsic benefit of eating or not eating certain foods, just choosing not to eat certain foods imbues those choices with meaning. And if it's meaningful, then it's sustainable.
I love that choosing to eat certain foods and not to eat certain other foods can be an act of self-care and can give focus and meaning to our lives. And particularly so if we're choosing foods that are good for our bodies and good for the earth and the whole earth community. Dean, I love that the same food choices that are best for our health are also best for the web of life on our precious but deeply endangered planet. I wonder sometimes how we can reach young people, maybe through their music. There are a lot of famous musicians who are eating whole foods plant-based today, including Beyonce and Jay-Z and Billie Eilish and Moby, just to name a few.
My son, Lucas, is an accomplished musician, and his godfather is Quincy Jones, who's been mentoring him, and so he's gotten really good. He's just very talented anyway. And about 3 years ago, one of his favorite indie bands is called Wolfpack, and they were giving a concert at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. So we went backstage to say hello because most of the band is vegan, and one of the guy who's the frontman said, "Hey, we always we stop in the middle of our concert and talk about why we're vegan. And we often cite your work, and since you're here, why don't you go out and talk about it?" I said, "What?" I said, "You want me to go out in the middle of your concert and talk about why people should eat a plant-based diet?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." So I did, which I guess for 15 minutes I was cool for my son, which is about how long that lasted. But it was really kind of a rush to be in front of like 12 or 13,000 people. And they're all in their late teens, early 20s. So I was going to talk about heart disease and diabetes with groups like that. So I said, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by all the massive crises that our planet is facing, that we're all facing, from global warming to feeding the hungry to deforestation of the Amazon to all the cruelty to all these billions of sentient beings. What can I do as one person to make a difference? Well, it turns out that something as primal as what you choose to eat every day can actually make a difference in all these different things. More global warming is caused by livestock consumption and all forms of transportation combined. It takes 14 times more resources to make a pound of meat-based protein. There's enough food to feed everyone if more people move towards that end of the spectrum. You don't have to be a vegan, just have a meatless Monday. Whatever you do, there's a corresponding benefit to you, to the planet, and to that sense of meaning, which I think is what we're also hungry and looking for. And the same is true for the deforestation of the Amazon. Most of that is to clear cut for cattle grazing and for the 13 billion animals that get killed every year in horrible conditions. That, if that was the only thing you had to eat, then that's how you survive. But we have lots of other options that we don't have to do that. So it's good karma. Anyway, so they love that.
Dean, it seems to me that just about everything you've done and accomplished for the past 40 years are things that were once thought to be impossible. Are you now?
Pretty much everything.
Yes.
I feel like I've been on borrowed time since I was 19. That's given me a lot of courage to do things that I wouldn't do otherwise, because people say, "Well, wow, how can you do these studies? You don't even know where the money's coming from when you start them. And everybody tells you it's not going to work." I said, well, first I listen to my own inner voice, and second, what's the worst that could happen? I'll learn something. When people are on their deathbeds, they don't generally regret what they did. They generally regret what they didn't do, because if you do something and it doesn't work out, then there's a powerful learning that comes from that. But if you don't even try, then you just wonder and we have regret. It was thought that once you had heart disease, it would only get worse, and you could slow it down if you made big enough changes, but that was about it. And what we found was that the changes they were recommending, less red meat, more fish and chicken, take the skin off the chicken, 4 eggs a week, American Heart Association type diet, didn't go far enough to stop the disease from getting worse. If you were just trying to prevent a disease, it's ounce of prevention, pound of cure. You don't have to make such big changes to prevent disease in most cases, but you do to reverse it. And so we had asked people to make much bigger changes, and they actually got better. And we found they got better to the degree they made those changes at any age, which was surprised to me. I had predicted incorrectly that younger people would do better, but it wasn't how old or how sick they were. It was just really a function of the more they changed, the more they improved, both in how they felt and in ways we could actually measure.
Well, I'm curious. I know you have a project working with patients with Alzheimer's.
I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease 44 years ago. In other words, now the thinking is Alzheimer's can't get better, it can only get worse. And you can slow it down a little bit and that's about it. And my mom died of Alzheimer's and all of her siblings, and I have one of the genes for it. So I have a personal interest. I mean, my mom was a true genius, and just watching her mind decay was just so devastating for everybody.
My mother also died of Alzheimer's.
And you probably have one of the genes too, for all you know. But the good news is that I think that we're at a place with Alzheimer's that my hypothesis is that, we already know that more moderate changes can slow the rate of progression into dementia, into Alzheimer's. Just like 44 years ago, less intensive lifestyle changes slow the rate of getting worse and worse heart disease. And again, we know what's good for your heart is good for your brain and vice versa. The same risk factors that affect one disease affect the others. Same biological mechanisms affect one disease, affect the others. The less intensive lifestyle interventions like the finger study and the mind study and the men study and others has shown that less intensive diets like a Mediterranean diet can slow the rate of getting worse. My theory is, again, ounce of prevention, pound of cure, maybe bigger changes would be required to stop or even reverse its progression. Wouldn't that be great? Well, it's a big if, because they've spent billions and billions of dollars trying to find a magic drug that's going to somehow do this. And they even found drugs that could dissolve some of the amyloid in the brain, thinking that was the cause, but even in people who had less amyloid, it didn't improve their cognitive function.
No, it didn't. And in fact, no drug has ever been found that can actually slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease, much less one that can begin to reverse it. We just do not have a pharmaceutical answer for this disease, despite billions having been spent trying to find one. It sure would be great if your diet and your program could reverse this tragic illness. Dean, what are you finding? How is the study going?
So we're in the middle of the study. We're cautiously optimistic by our interim results, but that's all I can really say. We're still looking for funding to finish the study. Again, it's a bit of a catch-22. If you're trying to do something, as we always do, that's never been done before, it's hard to get funding for it. It's like, without the funding, you can't show it's going to work. And if people don't think it's going to work, then why should I waste my money? It's not going to work. But of course, those are the most exciting things when they work and most people think they won't.
Nice job.
So what I've done is I usually find an angel or two or three somewhere who can give me enough money to get started. And I tell everybody I work with, I say, look, this is not the normal way people do research. Normally you apply for an NIH grant, it takes you a year, and maybe 9% of them get funded, or whatever it is these days, not very much. After you spend 3 or 4 months working on them, and then once you get the money, then you do the study. It takes 2 or 3 years before you get started. I say, let's just do it. Somehow the universe provides, and I can't tell you, for every study that I've done, including this one, we still haven't raised all the money we need to finish it. But we're getting such provocative, interesting preliminary data that I'm hoping it'll become easier to raise the money. But if anyone out there, has early stage Alzheimer's disease and has what's called a MoCA score of 18 or higher, go to ornish.com. You can let us know. We'll take a look and see if you're eligible for our study if we haven't recruited everyone or almost everyone by then. It's a randomized trial of 100 men and women who have early stage Alzheimer's disease. And after 20 weeks, we compare them and see how they're doing. We're also looking at a number of inflammatory biomarkers and changes in the microbiome and telomeres and gene expression and so on. We're collaborating with the heads of neurology, not only in the Bay Area, but also at Harvard and Mass General Hospital, at UC San Diego, and in Las Vegas. If we were to be able to show that we could stop or even reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's, it could give millions of people new hope and new choices, because nothing else works.
Well, if it works, the implications are truly profound, because we don't have a treatment for Alzheimer's, and the incidence of the disease is increasing all the time. We are a sick society. The level of obesity in the country and in the world is now at an all-time high. The average woman in the US today weighs as much as the average man did in 1960.
Whoa.
More than half of today's children are expected to be obese by age 35. Dean, what goes through your mind and heart when you reflect on these realities?
Well, I've seen those CDC maps of the rate of obesity going from year to year, and it looks like an invasion across the U.S. and like we're being invaded by some from outer space. They are scary.
Turn it off.
What's really going on here?
Yeah.
What's the cause of
Can
this?
you
It's
try
not
to
just
squeeze it with
the
a
symptoms, but what's
pop
really the
holder?
cause?
If it
I ask
gives,
people, why do
take
you
'em out.
eat so much? Why are you overweight? Or why do you smoke? Or why do you drink too much? Or why do you abuse opioids? Or play so many video games? Or work all the time? Or whatever. These behaviors seem so maladaptive to me, and they'd always go, you don't get it. You don't have a clue. These behaviors are very adaptive because they help us to deal with our loneliness, our pain, our depression, which I think is a real pandemic in our
Okay,
culture.
yeah.
You look at the amount of
No,
antidepressants
they're not
that are
supposed to be
prescribed,
gushy,
nothing
then they're
else.
overcooked.
The kinds
If
of
they give
things
a
that I
little
was
bit.
Oh,
struggling
then they're
with.
good.
Okay,
And
take
people
them
are
out.
really looking for a sense of connection and community and a sense of meaning in their lives.
Yep.
I think that when we work at that level, people are going to be much more likely to not be obese and not do all these things because they say things like, food fills that void I feel because I can't find a sense of meaning. I'm empty inside. Fat, a well-known food writer years ago told me, fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain. Alcohol numbs the pain. Opioids numb the pain. I've got 20 friends and this pack of cigarettes, and they're always there for me. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Video games distract me from my pain. Working all the time distracts me from my pain. One of the studies that Ann and I cited in our new Undo It book is the more time you spend on Facebook, the more depressed you are. It's like, well, why is that? Because it's a false intimacy.
Well, when I play video
to be
games,
pretty
No,
I
no,
intimate,
I
if you
pace,
grow up
I
in a
walk around, I get
neighborhood with
excited.
3 generations of people, or you have an
It has to
extended
do with the
family
state of mind that you
they
are
know you.
going
They
Yeah,
know
into it.
you.
yeah, I have fun with my
Facebook
video games.
profile, in Facebook, it looks like everybody has this perfect life, but it's like, here we are with our successful kids, and here we are, meeting with some important person or whatever. It's not an authentic intimacy as opposed to when you grow up in an extended family or a neighborhood with 3